You're listening to the Oneofus.net podcast network. Because I just hate rye bread that much. I didn't want to watch a whole movie about some teenager who's like, rye is awesome.
Honestly, that would have been better than the actual movie I just saw.
Oh, is that not what this is about?
Unfortunately not, no.
I thought it was an origin to Hollywood stars and celebrities. What do they know? Do they know things?
Also would have been a better movie.
That would have been a way better movie.
We are reviewing Rebel and the Rye. I did not see this one, as I already pointed out, but on the review crew, we have...
Ian.
George.
Michael.
So what the fuck is this movie about, anyway?
It's all about J.D. Salinger from the point right before he publishes his first short story up to the point that he decides that, you know what, I'm still going to write, I'm just not going to publish it.
I thought it was an X-Men Origins for Beast.
Why?
Also would have been fun.
Nicholas Hoult.
And it involves World War II.
Also it involves wars, and this movie's awful.
It's not awful. They're both wrong.
It's a Lifetime movie that got a theatrical release.
But it is a Lifetime. It is basically a Lifetime movie. But let's start from the beginning, I guess, because basically he's right. It is an origin story to J.D. Salinger.
Well, not an origin story. I mean, it's basically a life story of his publishing career.
He's not a superhero, Mike.
I wasn't going to say...
You don't have to compare everything to a superhero movie.
I was going to mention...
a superhero actor is playing the guy. Like,
I was actually going to say it was an origin of Catcher in the Rye.
Okay, the movie is about a boy.
Wait, it's based on the movie about a boy?
Yeah.
Oh my god!
So that was the joke.
Is it the origin joke? Is it the origin story for the older character in About a Boy?
Exactly.
I'm curious.
The younger character.
Oh, the younger,
in
but that
About
was
a Boy.
the origin
Okay,
story.
we've already derailed this.
All right.
Okay, let's go back.
Starts with him at age 19 or 20, right before he actually gets his first short story published. He's in a creative writing class with Kevin Spacey, who's the professor, who also publishes a little magazine called Look Magazine. That he is a fan of.
It was called Story.
It's called Story Magazine. Yes, sorry. Look Magazine published Stanley Kubrick's photographs around the same time.
Yeah, you're thinking of something else entirely.
Yeah, that movie's coming out next month. So,
but you forgot to skip the parts where he talks to old stereotypical 1930s people who speak like old 1930 movies.
what?
But only them, but not him.
All like with high trousers and like what do you call that accent?
Yeah. It's
there was the Continental accent, I think is what it was called, but like Katharine Hepburn and that sort of thing.
Yeah, everybody.
A high society thing where you talked like vaguely British. But
I thought if I remembered correctly, that was even fictional. Like there never was a Continental accent. It was invented for movies. Like,
no, like there actually was one. Yeah.
Was it? What? Okay, because I thought it was.
I'd read an article about it.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I bow to the person with better knowledge than me.
But everyone spoke like that except for him mostly for the first like 20 minutes of the movie.
Because he's the rebel.
Yeah.
Because he's not a phony.
He's not a phony.
Oh my god!
Which is a big theme in Catcher in the Rye.
And that's a big.
The word phony is used less than in Catcher in the Rye to its credit, but not that much less.
Yeah.
As a man who's read half a book, I feel that that this movie
without picture.
Just any book doesn't even matter.
Weird. I don't know. Like as the movie progressed, like it goes from that point. And then, he after, hanging out with Kevin Spacey, who Kevin Spacey's amazing, by the way, in this movie, because he's Kevin Spacey.
Is he just doing Kevin Spacey?
Pretty much.
Basically, he's smart, he's
what you're going to get.
He's the smartest guy in the room.
He's witty, he's absolutely,
who's not diabolical in this.
He grabs your attention, but there's a line early on a part of early on in the movie where he's teaching J.D. Salinger that a story can be interesting, even if it's spoken in a monotone. This movie apparently forgot to learn that lesson. And so the movie is just like Nicholas Hoult as J.D. Salinger is not very interesting.
Look, I think the thing with this movie is...
I disagree completely.
I
like his performance.
I think the thing with this movie is, it's got a lot of great actors in it, giving varying levels of quality as far as their performances. But I feel like, at least for me, the biggest problem with this movie is if you're setting out to make a biopic, the intention of that biopic for general audience goers should be, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to watch this movie, and I'm going to learn more about the subject.
Right.
I think you learn everything you need to know about the subject. But it's a biopic of his publishing career specifically.
Well, see, that's the thing, is I feel like I learned about his career, but I didn't learn anything about J.D. Salinger, the man.
How much do we actually know about J.D. Salinger, the man?
And that's what makes
everything you need to know. You get a glimpse of his family life. You get an idea of how much Holden Caulfield was autobiographical. You get a feel for, just what his life was before he started writing and what his life was like when he decided to stop publishing.
Yeah, you see that, but the problem with this movie is it's a bunch of collection of scenes, it's a collection of moments, but I feel like it never actually, these scenes never actually weave together and they tell a cohesive story. It's just, now we're in...
time jump, sorry.
Yeah, the passage of time in this movie is very weird because it'll just be, okay,
how many
now,
years are we talking about? Like
from like the 30s to about the...
Late 30s to early 60s.
Okay, so a good period of time.
Yeah. And it doesn't help that like none of the actors really age at all. They don't really, differentiate their appearances at all. And just the passage of time from scene to scene, sometimes it'll be days, sometimes it'll be months, and you're not really sure exactly how much time is going on.
Like the biggest ways of telling time is actually through the war, through World War II, because if you know your history, you're like, okay, this is 1939 because they're... or 1938, kind of because they're invading Poland, and then to get to the point where, okay, this is 1941 because Pearl Harbor got attacked. Like, it only tells you the actual date, like once, like right after the war, it just says 1946, like randomly, and that's the only time it tells you the date.
Yeah, other than you
I disagree.
figuring it out.
I think that if you actually are familiar with J.D. Salinger's story, or when these things were published, or when these events took place, you know when it took place. And I happen to be a fan of Salinger, so I knew exactly when these events were taking place.
I feel like
and
that's
they don't really.
Though.
But I mean, that is it.
But they don't really jump forward in time that significantly. Most of the action takes place within about a 10-year period. He gets to New Hampshire. He continues to write a little bit more, and that all takes place in about a 10-year period. And you can tell that based on, they do age him up a little bit, but not a whole lot, but you can tell that based on the fact that there's more children, etc. And then we get to the end of the movie.
Yeah, I feel like that's a complete cop-out, though, because it's one of those things where it's like not everyone in the audience is going to know J.D. Salinger's work, kind of thing. So if you're not telling me...
I mean, that's a valid point to say,
then you lose the rest
you should be able to watch a movie where it's not inherent that you're super familiar already with that character.
That's the way The Watchmen was. Like, everyone's like, The Watchmen's a great movie because I knew everything. It was like, well, what about the people who didn't know everything about that specific
and that's the thing is somebody watching this who didn't really know anything about Salinger, I think would get really lost really quickly because at a certain point, you're running through all these different, checkpoints in his life, but it kind of, for me, fell into the trap that a lot of biopics do where it tries to, tell a story over such a wide canvas and hit all the big bullet points of this person's life that you end up not really learning a whole lot about them as a person and really getting a story out of that.
But George, you felt as someone who was hyper familiar with his works that it was a good very illustrative of those points.
The thing about the approach, it's too basic. I will say that, and there's like almost no style to it at all. It is very much just like these are the things that happened, and I think that in a way they were trying to honor when J.D. Salinger wrote about movies he liked and didn't like.
Right.
They're trying to honor what he expressed about movies and how they were phony, etc. And they were trying to not get in the way of the story, as is illustrated by how do you tell a story? Don't get in the way of it.
I can kind of get that, but there's just so many like time jumps that feel kind of random because just at one point they're like he's married and now he's not married and now he's married again or some kind of thing, and it was just like, well, what was the point of telling me that exact? Or not telling me that exactly.
Yeah, there's a few moments that feel kind of trivial.
It's interesting that it's directed by first-time director Danny Strong, but who has a long career working as a writer, writing for film and television, and winning a fuck ton of awards for it as well. Oh, wow. But it's always a big transfer point between just being the writer and being the guy directing your own material.
Yeah, I can see this as being something that he was very passionate about, that he wanted to be as accurate as possible to really capture who Salinger was. And I think that he did. I just think that the movie isn't that captivating because of it. If you come in as a Salinger fan, you will learn a couple things, but not necessarily more than you would also learn from a Wikipedia article.
Not as much as we'd learn if they would just go ahead and publish those other books they're sitting on that they've been sitting on for years, and I can't figure out why they're not out yet.
You can't really
I think the greatest tragedy of this movie is the woman who breaks J.D. Salinger's heart is Una O'Neill, whose granddaughter, who looks an awful lot like her, is Una Chaplin.
Yeah.
And she was murdered in the Red Wedding just like 2 years after J.D. Salinger died. If he'd just survived 2 more years, he could have seen the woman who broke his heart, or a woman who looks just like her, get murdered.
That would have been amazing.
Famously.
And played by Zoey Deutch here. But I was going to ask, how's Sarah Paulson, who seems to be kind of like a secret weapon right now?
I mean, she's good. You know, you're never going to get a.
She was the publisher. Publishing is everything.
She was good.
You're never going to get a bad Sarah Paulson performance, but I feel like the movie didn't really utilize her as much as I would have liked. You know,
she's just sort of there as like a random extra that will say, "This is the thing about publishing."
I disagree. I think she's an important person in his life. Just like Kevin Spacey is an important person in his life. And it's kind of interesting that when Kevin Spacey kind of goes away, that she kind of takes over that role.
Well, I don't mean by the story. I mean just like as
the representation
how often she was used. I felt like she was more like an extra.
I noticed James Urbaniak from the Venture Brothers.
He shows up as someone who trashes Catcher in the Rye. Like he's an editor at the New Yorker, and he has like 2 scenes. I always love when he shows up. You know, it makes me happy.
I remember I had to review this trailer, and I was like, I saw a scene with him. I was like, that voice. Yeah. Wait, I know that voice. And I had to go on the Wikipedia page. It's like, oh yeah, okay, yeah.
There's a lot wrong with this movie though. At the end of the day, but a lot of it feels like it's not. It's partially budget, as well as they were trying too much on some of it. Especially the war sequences. Like, the war sequences, half of it works and the other half just doesn't work at all. Because, especially the actual parts where he's fighting, kind of thing, like being shot at, because you're just seeing these weird, like, terrible effects that are trying to be like, well, look, it's war. I'm like, well, like, I get what you're trying to do, but you're not selling me on it because now, like, I'm sucked out because now it's a Lifetime movie. Because I'm seeing, like, bright white flashes for explosions kind of thing. But then there's another half where where it shows him seeing the death camps of World War II, and it's really well shot in a way that makes it like, okay, this is kind of horrifying in a way, and that works. But there's so much of it that, like, it just didn't work for me because
it's inconsistent.
Yeah, it's just very inconsistent.
Yeah, and one of the big things that kind of stuck out to me is, and it was surprising considering Danny Strong being such a, you know, really well, you know, accomplished writer in his own right. It's the fact that I thought a lot of the dialogue in this was just way too on the nose, and you know, early on, there's this whole scene where Kevin Spacey kind of like jokingly analyzes J.D. Salinger of like, oh, you just have all these daddy issues and, you know, a superiority complex, kind of saying that in jest. But then the movie takes that and then runs with it and plays it way too seriously. And it's like we've seen this type of story before of, oh, Dad never said he loved me, so now I got to go and prove him wrong, you know, in front of everybody. And it's like, okay, I get that, but again, I've seen this in, you know, 87 biopics already. Like, give me something new. Give me something that I'm not going to see on TV.
But if that's the story that happened, then that's the story that
happened. That's the story that happened, but
you could do it more artfully.
Yeah, you could do it more artfully, or just tell it in a different way than something I've already seen. I feel like we barely
even got that part of the story, because his dad shows up like maybe, 4 times in the entire movie is what it felt like.
Victor Garber.
Yeah, Victor Garber. Another, like Sarah Paulson, another a television actor that's so good they shouldn't just be on television.
In my head, I know he's not David Morse, but in my head, when I'm trying to figure out what's this actor's name, I always get the 2 mixed up, Victor Garber and David Morse. They're not even that similar.
He's Jennifer Garner's dad, for my money.
And he's the captain on the Titanic, right?
Yes, I believe that is true.
Or was that David Morse?
He was one of the
Darkest Night was David Morse.
And now he's half of Firestorm.
That's why I mentioned Professor Stein. But he his entire point in the movie is basically just to breaks J.D. Salinger's balls for the first hour.
So he has a complicated relationship with this.
It's just him basically saying you shouldn't be a writer. 80% of the time.
They say that he has a complicated relationship with his father, and it's a thing that the movie does a lot, where they say, "Oh, such and such has issues with this person. Oh, JD, he isn't getting along with his wife. Oh, he's not getting along with this person."
So they say it instead of showing.
But they never show it. You see somebody.
No, they show it. They don't say it.
You see somebody bringing up the problem that he might have, and then the next scene, with his first wife.
He actually addresses the issues with his father is when he's saying, "My father doesn't love me either." It's this moment of really revealing himself.
But that's the problem I have with the movie, because just saying my father doesn't love me doesn't really work if you don't show me him looking like he doesn't love him in some way.
But you do. You see that. You actually see him.
Were y'all on 2 different screenings?
I feel like I don't know, man. Like he saw a way better movie than I saw, which is kind of weird. So I want to know what you were on.
Well, I'm glad one of you guys really liked it. I hate to think it was a waste of time.
It's not that I hate it. It's just that it felt kind of pointless at the end of the day. I'll just forget about this movie pretty quickly once we're done. This
is a movie literally about how cosplaying fanboys will drive you crazy and make you move to New Hampshire.
This is true.
So you don't have to see cosplaying fanboys anymore.
That's actually a pretty good description of J.D. Salinger's life.
I don't even know.
And yet he still raises the future Captain America.
I don't even know what a Holden Caulfield cosplay would look like.
We saw it
red hat, flannel jacket,
catcher's mitt, and lots of rye.
Did you never read the book?
I did. It's been a long time.
Okay.
I think I read like a quarter of
He's
it.
covering. He never actually read it.
I went to high
the
school.
title, and they actually excerpt part of the novel. They excerpt the part of the novel that explains the title anyway. So even the people who forget, why the fuck is it called Catcher in the Rye again? Oh, that's right, because Holden Caulfield wants to save children from losing their innocence. You know, he basically has a dream where the children are playing in the rye, but it's near a cliff, and if he doesn't stop them from going off the cliff, they'll die, which is a metaphor for losing their innocence.
Did they have like a visual metaphor for that in this movie?
And then at some point, J.D. Salinger, it comes up that he loves children because they're still innocent, even though he doesn't seem to give his own children very much time.
I feel like you're desperately trying to save yourself in the rye on this one. Because you're making this movie sound so much more interesting than it actually was.
But it was to him. So.
Yeah, it was to him, and I'm not going to take that innocence from him.
But this is also someone, and I'm someone who was a big fan of Catcher in the Rye, who... You know, I've read a little bit of the rest of Salinger's work, but not that much. But I am familiar with him as a person, as an author, and I am familiar with his life.
What do you think of Banana Fish?
It should be one word.
Banana fish?
Yeah, banana fish.
It's another detail.
Do you like a banana fish sandwich?
Ring, ring,
I like
ring,
banana
ring,
fish
ring,
sandwich.
banana fish.
It has to be one word.
It'd be swim, 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 swim. All right, let's go to final thoughts. Michael, get us started.
Okay, there was a lot I didn't really talk about, but I guess I'll just throw everything right off the bat. I think Nicholas Hoult did an okay job. Like, the first half, I felt like he did awful. Because it just felt like he's just saying words, kind of thing. Like, it didn't feel like he was
actors
trying...
do.
It didn't feel... The problem was
In front of a camera.
I didn't
for
feel
money.
I didn't feel like he was actually acting. I felt like he literally was, like, seeing it in the corner, just going, I'm going to say this thing real quick. But then after the war stuff, I felt like he started, like, showing a little more range with, like, the actual emotion that Salinger probably had at that point. A lot of the other characters, or not characters, but a lot of the other actors in the movie, a lot of them, like, some of them worked, like Kevin Spacey absolutely worked, but I felt like some of them were just sort of there at the end of the day, and some people just felt kind of stereotypical, but that's not necessarily the actor's fault so much as that the story didn't give them anything to work with. But by the time it was done, I was like, okay, well, you know, I got a better understanding of who he was as a person, but not all that much that was interesting that I was ever on his side, kind of thing. And so at the end of the day, I would give it 6 banana fishes out of 10.
George?
I mean, there's a lot to like about it, but it also feels just like a basic biopic, and it's something where I'm not sure anyone who isn't a fan of Salinger or isn't a fan of Catcher in the Rye at the very least and wants to know more about it. I mean, it's almost like a DVD extra for a movie that doesn't exist. You know, I can see that. So while I liked a lot about it, I liked a lot of the performances. I think ultimately they did capture his life well in a fair manner. It's still ultimately just a pretty good movie, you know. And I would give it 7 out of 10 rejection letters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, you kind of called it a basic biopic, and that's the word I would use to describe this movie is basic. It checks off all the marks that you should, or in theory that you should on a biopic like this, of, you know, his relationship with his parents and the heartache that he goes through and his struggles with alcoholism and all that. But it just feels kind of lifeless and empty, you know. And when the movie was over, I was just...
And phony!
If I hear that fucking word again one more time. But yeah, honestly, like, I watched it and I went, okay, when the movie was over and the credits rolled, I kind of sat there and I wondered, what was the point of that? What was the point of, you know, me watching it in the theater, because it had all the production value of a Lifetime movie, and I felt like I didn't learn anything about him as a character, as a person. You know, I got a collection of scenes rather than a story.
Right.
And what information about him was doled out was told to me in the most, like, lowest common denominator. This is what I'm feeling right now, and this is how you should feel right now, kind of way, rather than, you know, expressing that visually and through drama like a film like this should. So yeah, I mean, it's not a terrible film, but it's just so, like, aggressively mediocre that it's the type of aggressively mediocre that really just gets under my skin. So yeah, with that, I'll probably give it 4 Matt Salinger fake dry heavings out of 10.
Yeah, there's quite a few of those.
In my head, this movie's improved by picturing the end of it, where like I have 2 possible endings for this movie in my head. One, like like it's the last scene between Kevin Spacey and Nicholas Hoult, and like Kevin Spacey gives him some like profound but confusing advice and walks out, and Holt's in there thinking about it, and he drops his coffee cup and he sees on the bottom of it. That's what I've written. And then you see Kevin Spacey's whole stance change. The other one is just Una O'Neill's head in a box. So
I just keep thinking
like 2 more years and he would have seen the Red Wedding. Oh my god!
I just keep thinking of BoJack Horseman, and I feel like that's the epilogue that I needed from this movie.
What? But that he turns into a guy with a horse's head?
Exactly.
No, that he faked his death, and then he made a TV show about celebrities and if they knew things.
That would be awesome. If it turned out Salinger faked his death, I would be... The only way I'd be happier is if it turned out that Andy Kaufman faked his death.
Yeah, he was 91. Like, what would he have done after faking his death?
That's true. It's not like he's like, I'm going to go climb the Mount Everest.
He just wanted to be left alone.
He should have faked his life. Like, he wasn't really living in New Hampshire in the cabin the entire time. He was out just being a normal person.
Yeah, he was hanging out on that same island that Elvis and Tupac are chilling
He's
on.
a CIA hitman or something.
There's also the
like
secret
Chuck
ending
Barris.
where Charles Xavier shows up to enlist him into the X-Men.
You're going to kill him with your super
I know, and I love doing it because he just looks like he wants to shoot me every time I say something nerdy about it.
That was Connecticut, not New Hampshire.
Why is that?
That's important difference.
That's very important difference. So, yeah.
They don't have rye in New Hampshire.
Do they not?
I don't know.
Of course.
Oneofus.net has been your one-stop shop for all things geek for years. But there's a side to them many of you have never heard. The subscription side. Subscribe and listen to great podcasts like The Breakfast Pub, The Original Gentleman, and the Watch a Movie With Us series. Head on over to oneofus.net and don't forget your towel.